The banking system completely collapsed that Friday morning. ATMs were shut down, apps froze, transactions were declined. Bank managers frantically called the IT department, but no one had answers. When the situation seemed hopeless, a 76-year-old retiree waiting in line pointed to the clock on the wall and said calmly, "That's the problem." Everyone laughed at him. No one imagined that Eugene Thompson wasn't there just to sort out an issue with his pension. He was about to prove, without typing a single key, that 5 decades of experience in computer systems didn't retire along with him. Eugene Thompson lived in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in San Antonio, Texas. It was a simple place, but neat and organized. The hallway smelled of freshly brewed coffee and the wooden stairs creaked with every step. In the living room, a bookshelf held a few technical books on operating systems, logic, programming languages, and computer architecture. On the wall, there was a single framed photograph, Eugene in a military uniform, standing beside an IBM mainframe computer from the 1980s, surrounded by a team of young engineers. In the same room sat a modest table, used both for meals and for the long solitary hours he spent fixing small electronic devices that neighbors brought over. Eugene had grown up in a middle-class family in the 1950s. From an early age, he was fascinated by electronic equipment. At 8 years old, he would take apart broken radios he found at the junkyard and make them work again. By 12, he had built his own radio receiver from scrap parts. Soon, neighbors began bringing him broken devices for the prodigy kid to repair. As a teenager, Eugene spent countless hours at the public library studying electronics manuals. When the first computers arrived at the local university, he managed to get permission to watch the technicians at work. He taught himself Fortran and COBOL, programming on punch cards through long nights. He graduated with a degree in computer science in 1970, when the field was still in its infancy. His thesis on synchronization in distributed systems caught the attention of military recruiters. The U.S. Army was looking for specialists who could develop secure and reliable communication systems. Eugene enlisted as a systems officer in 1972. He spent his first years developing communication protocols for military bases around the world. His job was to ensure that critical commands reached the right destination, at the right time, without enemy interference. In the 1980s, he worked on the development of the first-time synchronization systems for coordinated military operations. The idea was simple in theory. Every computer in a network needed to have the exact same time. If not, commands could arrive out of sequence, causing catastrophic failures. Eugene helped design protocols that made it possible for bases thousands of miles apart to operate in perfect unison. In the 1990s, Eugene rose in rank and was assigned to oversee the modernization of legacy systems. He managed the transition from old mainframes to distributed architectures, always with a focus on time reliability. He knew every detail about how different systems interpreted timing signals, how they reacted to desynchronization, and how to fix errors without disrupting critical operations. After 48 years of service, he retired with full military honors. He received commendations for technical contributions that remain classified to this day. Eugene returned to San Antonio, bought his modest apartment, and tried to adapt to civilian life. The first few years were tough. Not wanting to sit idle, he applied for jobs in tech companies, but always heard the same line. "Impressive background, but we're looking for someone younger." Over time, he stopped looking for work and lived solely on his military pension. The pension covered his basic needs, but not his growing medical expenses. Arthritis in his hands, back problems, medication for high blood pressure and diabetes. Eugene learned to cut costs, cook simple meals, and take public transportation. He rarely went out, except for doctor's appointments or to handle official paperwork. That Friday morning, Eugene had to go to First National Bank to fix an issue with his retirement payment. The amount had been deposited incorrectly for 2 months in a row. Phone calls hadn't solved it, so he was forced to go in person. He put on a dress shirt and polished black shoes, the same style he had worn for decades. He took the bus and arrived at the bank at 9:20 a.m., 10 minutes before opening. Eugene didn't expect that Friday to be any different from the others. He only planned to sort out his paperwork quickly and head back home. He had no idea that nearly 50 years of experience solving complex systems were about to be tested in the most unexpected way possible. As he waited in line, Eugene couldn't have imagined that in just a few minutes his technical knowledge would be the only thing standing between the bank and a complete collapse. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the doors of First National Bank opened. Eugene walked in with 15 other customers, heading straight to the service counter. The branch was modern, with marble floors, glass walls, and digital screens, showing stock market quotes. The manager handling his case was Lauren Bailey, a 36-year-old woman. Eugene knew her from previous visits, professional but clearly impatient with older customers, who took longer to understand digital procedures. "Mr. Thompson," Lauren said, glancing at her computer screen, "I see you're here about the retirement deposit issue. Let me check our system." Eugene nodded and sat down in the chair across from her desk. By 9:45, Lauren was frowning. "That's odd. The system isn't responding. Let me try again." From across the branch, Eugene heard the first sign of trouble, the distinct error beep from the ATMs. 3 customers complained that their transactions had been declined. A young employee, Ethan, walked nervously between the machines, trying to restart them. "Lauren," Ethan called out, "the ATMs are down. All of them. All 4. And the internal system's lagging too." Eugene stayed seated, but his ears picked up other warning signs. The muffled sound of phones ringing nonstop upstairs in the IT department, tense voices echoing in the halls, and the hum of the servers sounding uneven, with pauses that shouldn't be there. By 10:05, the situation was deteriorating quickly. Customers in line began raising their voices. The bank's mobile apps froze mid-transaction. Employees tried calling tech support, but the lines were busy. Lauren tried to keep her composure, but Eugene noticed her hands trembling slightly as she typed commands that led nowhere. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to need you to wait a little longer. We're experiencing system instability." "Instability," Eugene murmured to himself. By 10:12, chaos had set in. 15 customers waited in unmoving lines. 3 employees rushed between terminals, rebooting equipment without success. The branch manager, Charles Wilson, stepped out of his office wearing an expression that barely concealed his panic. "Lauren, I need you in the meeting room now. We've got a serious problem." Eugene watched Charles whisper something to Lauren. She went pale. "Mr. Thompson," Lauren said quickly, standing up, "I'll have to pause our appointment. We have a technical emergency." That's when Eugene heard the phrase that confirmed his suspicions. Ethan shouted to another employee, "Billy, the system's rejecting all logins. Even the managers can't get in." Eugene calmly rose from his chair and walked to the center of the branch. He stopped near the main counter, watching the employees rush back and forth. Customers complained. Phones rang incessantly, but one detail caught his eye. On the wall behind the main counter hung a large clock, installed about 6 months ago. It read 10:22. Eugene checked his wristwatch. 10:15. A 7-minute difference. To most people, it would mean nothing. But for Eugene, who had spent decades working with time synchronization systems, it was a glaring red flag. He walked over to Lauren, who was speaking tensely with Charles near the meeting room door. "Excuse me," Eugene said, his tone calm but firm. Lauren turned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Mr. Thompson, I told you I have to deal with an emergency. You'll have to wait." "Your problem is that clock," Eugene said, pointing to the wall. Lauren and Charles exchanged glances. Charles gave a short, nervous laugh. "Sir, with all due respect, we can't waste time with—" "That clock is 7 minutes fast," Eugene interrupted. "Your primary time server is out of sync. That's why logins are failing, transactions are being rejected, and the systems are freezing." The silence that followed was broken by Ethan's laugh. "A clock? You think the problem's a clock on the wall?" Other employees drifted closer. A teller whispered, "Poor guy's probably just confused by all this commotion." Charles shook his head impatiently. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate you trying to help, but we have a specialized team working on this." The problem is far more complex than a clock. Eugene remained composed, but his voice carried the authority of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. Your system uses timestamp-based authentication. When the time server is out of sync, all your security tokens become invalid. You need to isolate the faulty server and activate the GPS-synced backup. The branch went silent. Lauren frowned. How do you know about time servers? Because I developed time synchronization systems for the U.S. Army for 48 years. Charles hesitated for a moment, glancing between the impatient customers and the scattered, stressed staff. Mr. Thompson, even if you're right about the diagnosis, I can't allow a customer to touch our systems. I don't need to touch a single computer, Eugene replied. I just need to go to the equipment room and point out which unit to shut down and which to start. 3 simple commands for your team to execute. Lauren looked at the wall clock, then at her own watch, confirming the 7-minute difference. She turned to Charles with a mix of desperation and curiosity. Charles, it's been 45 minutes. The central office won't stop calling. Customers are furious. What if he's right? Charles took a deep breath, glanced at the chaos around him, and made the toughest call of the morning. All right, Mr. Thompson. But if this makes things worse, it won't, Eugene said, already walking toward the door that led upstairs. It'll be fixed in 5 minutes. Eugene followed Charles and Lauren up to the 2nd floor, where the bank's equipment room was located. The hallway was narrow, lit by cool LED lights, filled with the constant hum of fans and servers running at high speed. 3 IT technicians were huddled around monitors, frantically typing commands. Guys, Charles said as he walked in, this is Mr. Thompson. He has a theory about what's going on. The 3 technicians turned. The oldest, Randy, about 40, wearing thick glasses and a bank t-shirt, gave Eugene a skeptical once-over. A theory? Randy asked. Sir, with all due respect, we've had 3 certified specialists on this for almost an hour. We've already tested firewalls, databases, network connectivity. The problem's not in the network, Eugene interrupted calmly. It's in time synchronization. Randy gave a short, dismissive laugh. Time synchronization? Our time servers are running just fine. Look. He pointed at a screen. All services are online. Eugene walked over to a specific equipment rack and stopped in front of 2 identical devices, one with a green LED flashing rapidly, the other with a steady blue light. This is your primary time server, he said, pointing to the first. It's syncing with a faulty external source. That one over there is the backup synced to GPS. You need to do 3 simple things. He turned to the technicians, who were now watching him with a mix of disbelief and growing curiosity. First, isolate the primary server from the network. Second, switch the backup server to primary mode. Third, force all critical systems to resync with the new time server. Randy crossed his arms. Sir, that doesn't make sense. If the time server were out of sync, we'd have alerts in the event logs. You do, Eugene said, but you're not looking in the right place. The error shows up as invalid token or expired certificate, not as a time error. The second technician, Joe, a 25-year-old, quickly pulled up the logs. Randy, he's right. We've got hundreds of invalid token errors in the last 15 minutes. That doesn't prove anything, Randy insisted. Could be authentication issues for other reasons. Eugene sighed softly. What's the time difference between your 2 time servers? Randy hesitated, then typed a few commands. His eyes widened. 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The room went silent. Lauren stepped closer to Charles and whispered, That's exactly the difference he noticed on the wall clock. Charles cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, assuming you're correct, how long would it take to implement your fix? If your team follows my instructions exactly. 5 minutes, Eugene replied. If you keep testing theories, it could take all day. Randy finally dropped his guard. All right, what exactly do we need to do? Eugene pointed to the primary server. First, remove this unit from the network configuration. Don't power it down, just isolate it. Joe ran the command while Randy watched nervously. Now, set the backup server to primary mode. A few more keystrokes, and the blue LED on the second server began flashing green. Lastly, run a forced sync command on all critical services: banking core, authentication, transaction processing. Randy typed a sequence of commands. Almost immediately, 3 separate monitors began showing synchronization successful messages. Less than 3 minutes later, the phone on the desk rang. Charles picked it up. "Hello? What do you mean it's working? The ATMs?" Yes, I'll come down right now." He hung up and turned to Eugene with a mix of relief and astonishment. "Mr. Thompson, they just told me the systems are coming back online. ATMs working, apps back up, transactions processing." Eugene nodded calmly. "Now you need to figure out why the primary server lost sync. Most likely the external time source it uses is having issues." Randy stepped toward Eugene, visibly embarrassed. "Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. You just saved the bank from a complete meltdown." Lauren, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Mr. Thompson, why isn't someone with your expertise helping train the newer teams?" Eugene smiled for the first time that day. "Because I retired, and since then no one's believed my experience was still worth anything." Charles exchanged a look with Lauren. "Mr. Thompson, can I make you an offer? Our bank often faces technical problems that our team takes far too long to solve. Would you be interested in consulting for us?" Eugene hesitated. "Consulting? I don't have current certifications or corporate credentials. You just fixed in 5 minutes what our certified team couldn't solve." Charles cut in. "Credentials are paperwork. Competence is what we just witnessed." Lauren stepped closer. "Mr. Thompson, along with consulting, would you be willing to help train our staff, teach them the kind of diagnostic work you did today?" Randy, now fully convinced, added, "Please, Mr. Thompson. I learned more in 10 minutes from you than in months of technical courses." Eugene looked around the room, at the equipment he had just healed, at the respectful faces of the technicians, at Lauren and Charles waiting for his answer. After 15 years of feeling invisible, Eugene Thompson realized his expertise hadn't aged a single day. "When would you like me to start?" 3 weeks later, Eugene Thompson arrived at First National Bank, not as a customer this time, but as the new senior consultant for information systems and data security. Lauren greeted him in the main lobby with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Eugene. How do you feel on your first day?" "Still a bit strange," he replied, noticing how employees now greeted him with respect. Up on the second floor, Eugene had been given a small but functional office. At 9:30 a.m., he began his first formal training session. The conference room was packed. Randy, Joe, 6 other technicians from different bank branches, and 2 regional managers who had come specifically to meet the man who fixed the system with a clock. "Everyone," Eugene began, with the ease of someone who had spent decades teaching, "I'm going to share something I learned back in 1975, when a 1-second error triggered the accidental launch of 3 missiles during a military exercise." The room fell completely silent. Critical systems fail for 2 reasons: excessive complexity or overlooked simplicity. You spent hours looking for complex problems, but ignored the simplest one. All computers need to know what time it is. For the next 2 hours, Eugene explained concepts no corporate manual ever taught. How to detect time drift before it causes failures. Why security certificates depend on precise time. How different systems interpret timestamps in different ways. Randy, now an eager student, asked technical questions that Eugene answered with the precision of a living manual. At the end of the presentation, Regional Manager Marcus Weber approached him. "Mr. Thompson, I have a question. How many banks have similar problems without realizing it?" Eugene thought for a moment. "Probably most of them. Time systems are the invisible infrastructure no one monitors until they fail. Would you be willing to expand this work to our other banks? We have 7 branches in the region." Eugene nodded slowly. "I can run diagnostics on each one. Identify vulnerabilities before they cause trouble." Over the following weeks, Eugene visited the branches. Each visit ended the same way: impressed technicians, managers offering contracts, invitations to return. 6 months later, Eugene had settled into a routine he'd never imagined possible at his age. Weekday mornings at the bank, afternoons free for consulting with other companies. His schedule stayed full. But the most significant change wasn't in his career. It was in the recognition. Bank employees greeted him in the hallways. Other banks called asking for his expertise. Tech companies offered contracts. Eugene Thompson had gone from invisible to indispensable. One afternoon, while sorting papers in his office at the bank, Eugene found a letter that had arrived through internal mail. It was from Randy. "Mr. Eugene, today I completed a diagnosis on my own that would have taken me days before I met you. I identified that a time drift was causing intermittent failures in card processing. I used exactly the method you taught me, and it worked perfectly. Thank you once again for your guidance." Eugene carefully folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. That evening, back at his apartment, Eugene made himself some coffee and sat in his living room armchair. He looked at the photo on the wall, his younger self, decades earlier, standing beside the IBM mainframe. The young Eugene in the photo had dreamed of changing the world through technology. The 76-year-old Eugene had discovered he had changed the world in a different way, by teaching others how to solve the problems he had learned to recognize over 5 decades. Sometimes, the greatest legacy isn't what you build yourself. It's what you teach others to build. Eugene Thompson had found his new purpose. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.